Hi, everybody. Kathy Davis, Davis Creative Publishing. I'm going to get ready to share my slides here. And you'll get to see all the lovely inner workings of my desktop. Here we go. We're going to hit full screen mode. Some of you may have seen part of this presentation previously, and hopefully there's something you'll be able to take away this time too. So Julie, I'm leaving the incoming guests to you. I can't see that board right now. So if you have a question, because I'm going to close my people screen a little bit so I can see my slides, just because we have such a small group, just go ahead and speak up, take yourself off mute and speak up and ask a question. And we'll go from there. We'll try and get them all answered. So your roadmap to publishing success. What is the best publishing path for you? I get asked this a lot. Let me make sure my little technology is going to work. Some of you have heard me tell the story about I grew up in Oklahoma. And if you've driven through Oklahoma, you may have seen signs that say, do not drive through smoke. And it is a real thing in Oklahoma where tumbleweeds, we don't get a lot of rain down there and although this year they have, but most years they don't get a lot of rain and the tumbleweeds will build up, which is really just dead bushes that come out of the ground and start blowing in the wind. And if you're driving along a highway and one of those gets stuck under your car, it could catch fire. And that's one of the things they actually teach you in driver's ed is to make sure that if you see smoke or if you see tumbleweeds, to pull off and make sure you drive around them, not over them. And I liken this quite a bit to the experience of publishing in today's world, in that sometimes you're going to get a lot of smoke from people. The one thing that most authors love to hear is the phrase, I'd love to publish your book, because it's like, oh, somebody likes me. Somebody really, really likes me. They're going to help me publish my book. Just want to be careful because publishing industry in the United States is not regulated yet. And anybody who has gone out there and figured out how to load one book up onto Amazon and self-publish themselves can put out a little shingle that says, I'm a publisher, and start acquiring new clients to do that. So it's all a level of quality. When I talk to people who say, oh, just signed with a publisher, they're going to help me publish my book, because they've heard that we'd love to publish your book. I want us to remember the acronym SMOKE, SMOKE. And if you've been around me for a while, you know I love my acronyms. SMOKE, when it comes to publishing, slow down, move out of the way, just as if you were a car driving down that highway in Oklahoma. Observe caution, don't bump into anybody. Know your options, ask a lot of questions, and get off the highway, get out of the way, move on if it doesn't feel right. One of the best ways that I know, because there's so many little publishing companies that have cropped up over the last 5-10 years. Let's say, just as I look around my room looking for a made-up name, let's say you have someone come to you and their publishing name is, imakebooks.com. You want to go out to Google or whatever search engine you want to use and Google the name of that publisher. And after that name, put the word complaints, and then do a second search and put the word reviews. Because what I've learned over the years is that it will show up both ways. You just want to make sure that you have some sort of idea of how this imakebooks.com works. So those of you who are not familiar with my background, as I did mention, I did grow up in Oklahoma in the 60s and 70s. I'm a late baby boomer. And during the recent pandemic, I was cleaning out some boxes in the basement and I ran across this construction paper book that I had made in grade school. And you'll see that in the upper left-hand corner of your screen here. I don't know what the assignment was, but it was probably 30 pages of construction paper that were held together on that left-hand side, and some of you may be old enough to remember this, you'd punch holes in your report, and then you would push these little brass tacks through that had legs, so to speak, that you could split open and flatten down, and that would hold your papers together. And I still have this book, but I thought, well, I had completely forgotten about this book and the story that I made up. And I was old enough apparently to know cursive writing because I wrote the whole book in cursive. But it was about some imaginary island. And I was even trying to remember, and they were postcards, that were my photographs. And I was even trying to remember who did I know about that time that might have been on a trip or a vacation that would have sent me postcards. But all that's long lost as part of the story. But I do have the book to tell the story. And I thought, well, isn't that amazing that way back in grade school, I was making books even. And one of my first jobs out of college, I got to work at a printing company in Oklahoma where I learned how do you print books. So as I look back on my life, I've always had a thread of being involved with books. And then I moved to St. Louis in the early 80s, and some of you may remember Library Limited Bookstore. And I was in charge of their displays. This is when they were in Clayton, their window displays and their interior displays. So I got to see the retail side of books and how all that works. And from there, they sold out to, I wasn't Barnes and Noble's, the other one, B. Dalton. And they went off and retired in California. I moved on and went to work in corporate. If you've been around St. Louis, it was Boatman's, then Nations Bank, and then Bank of America. We called it Bank of the Moment after a while. Hit burnout around 2003, which was a good timing for me because my department was also shut down in December 2003. And many of us got to go out and got to work on our own. And that was the time that I started working for myself. My husband joined me, and that was January 2004. My husband joined me in 2008. And fast forward to, we've now worked with over 600 solo authors and 45 plus anthologies, which is a collaborative book that has people write essays on a topic, which equates out to about over 2,000 authors. So we've worked with a few people. And I just see somebody was trying to get in. Oops. Julie, Richard Terry, if you're there, Richard Terry's been trying to get in and is looking for a way in. If you could reach out to him, that would be great. So for today's conversation, there's three main things we're going to talk about, all under the auspice of finding the best path for us, for you, to publish your book. Today, we want to talk about how to find your voice. What is your author brand platform? Do you have one? Do you need one? How to share your story, content that sells you, and how to make an impact. What are your different publishing paths that you could consider? And each year, this hasn't changed. This is probably a 2003 statistic, but I looked recently, and this hasn't changed in the last 3 years. The number of books that Amazon sells per year is 1 million plus. Now, I'll back that up. It's new titles added to Amazon per year is 1 million per year. That includes both DIY and traditional publishers. Because Amazon is a print on demand for the DIY world, they're going to get, that means that equates out to over 750 million books that Amazon prints. That's just Amazon. That doesn't include Barnes and Noble or Target or Walmart or your mom and pop bookstore on the corner. There's a lot of books that are people, I find people go back and rely upon books for a sense of hope, security, community, looking for escape if you're reading fiction or historical fiction even. Of those books that Amazon sells, they pay out around 575 million in royalties a year. So the trick becomes, how do you get those? How do you get a piece of that pie? Now, if you're only selling your book on Amazon, Amazon's going to keep most of the money. Of those who have great wisdom to share and are ready to show the world they care, the one most apt to get the dollars is the one who writes the book and hollers. You don't have to memorize this, but it was a cute little ditty that I found along the way. There are two things that we're always telling our authors. You're not going to plan your retirement around the sale of your book because Amazon likes to keep too much of the money. And two, it's not about how well your book sells. It is about how well your book sells you. What I mean by this, just because you build it, they will not come. Just because you put it on Amazon does not mean it's going to sell. So you want to take a step back. It's great that you've got a book or a book idea and you're ready to move forward on it. But who are you and who do you want to be known as? Who do you want people to recognize you as? If you think about the writers that you follow or the books that you read those particular books quite often because of that author. And you know that if you read this book, you're going to have a certain kind of experience. So where do you fit in? How do you define your author brand? And I like to use this example of guys. No two guys are alike. On the far left, you have Guy Fieri. He's a chef. He owns a lot of restaurants. He won a big contest on foodnetwork.com or one of those food networks on what used to be cable, whatever it is now. And you know him because if you pick up a book that's got his face on it or his name on it, it's going to have something to do with food. Then I'm going to skip the middle one for a second and go to the far right. You have Bill Nye. Bill Nye, if you grew up with Bill Nye, you knew him as the science guy, and he's in the middle of a new rebranding, as you see in his newest book, which is, very, very proper, very scientific, very, navy blue and banker-ish, but it's more he's still his target audience, ironically, are still the same people. We're just much older now and we're more sophisticated in our reading, and he's more sophisticated in the content that he puts out. Then in between those two, you have the Family Guy. I'll have to admit, I've never seen this, but I know it's a cartoon that functions on several different levels for adults and kids. But if they're going to put out a book, it's going to be in the shape of a comic book type book. So who are you? Where do you fit in? How do you define? What kind of guy are you? And guys are both male and female anymore. Excuse me. So why do I even want to be the guy or the gal? Especially with nonfiction, and we 90% of the books that we do are nonfiction. So a lot of what we're talking about today deals with nonfiction. But under that nonfiction umbrella could be memoirs. It could be a children's book. It goes beyond just books for business or self-help. You have personal growth. That's all included under that nonfiction umbrella. Excuse me for taking a quick sip. So these are some of the answers that I've gotten when I've asked speakers predominantly. We work with a lot of speakers, why do you want a book? And that is a question that I ask everyone that calls me that says, I'm thinking about writing a book or I've written a book. Why do you want a book? Well, if you are thinking about speaking, that's one of the best ways to get recognition. Think of your book as a marketing tool. It's going to give you a little bit of additional stream of income, but you're not going to plan your retirement. Again, remember that. Amazon keeps too much of the money. It does help you generate repeat business. Having that book makes you appear to be the expert. And indeed, even so, especially if you are, people learn to trust you. If you're familiar with the know, like, and trust formula, they get to know you later. The more they interact with you, they like you more. And even the more they interact with you, perhaps through your book, you're building that know, like, and trust ladder. And it immediately gives you that name recognition. There's a story about one of our authors who was a speaker early pandemic when, the speaking industry was just shut down. All conferences and conventions and workshops and everything got shut down. It was before a lot of people didn't even know what Zoom was at that point. He had spoken at this conference that got shut down like 2 years in a row and was looking forward to coming back. He had missed a couple years or there was some time in between. And companies will do that. Well, they'll, rotate you out for a while, bring someone in new, and then they'll say, oh, well, what about that guy that we had a couple years ago? Let's bring him back. And what happened was that the company had booked another speaker, and they had asked that speaker, can you just transfer what you're going to say to Zoom, and we'll use Zoom and bring everybody in? And he said, oh, no, I don't know how to do that. So they just turned around and looked on their bookshelf because they couldn't remember Greg's name. And they went, oh, we've got that book that guy handed out when he was here. He was a speaker. They turned around and they found his book on a bookshelf, and they said, let's call him. And lo and behold, people will keep your book before they keep your big business card, because there's this subliminal idea, which is true. Your book costs more, so there's more value than a business card. And if you're one of our authors, we're going to make sure that your name and your contact information is in the back of that book so that people can make sure they do get hold of you. So Greg got an extra gig that year when everybody else was losing them, because he said, I really didn't know what I was doing on Zoom, but I figured it out. We're in a world where you can Google it and you can figure it out. And it doesn't matter, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. When you're defining your brand, it's all the same. So these are all authors whose last name is Brown. They're all very different. Dan Brown, he's the author of the Da Vinci Code, and this other book here on the far left is Origins or Origin. Sandra Brown is a novelist. Sylvia Brown is a psychic. They've all got different brands going on. On the far right, there's children's book author Sharifa Brown. Many of you know Brene Brown, and Brene Brown is in the personal growth, self-help arena. Les Brown is also in the personal growth, self-help arena. And I've heard them both speak. If you know them, they have a very different audience. Boiled down, it's probably the same message of confidence that they're trying to share with the world, but they're packaging themselves differently. So this is when you want to start thinking about, what type of author do you want to be? What do you want to be known for? And then, of course, what do you want to write about? What are you the expert at? What's your life experience that you perhaps, your own hero's journey? I'm walking along in life, there's a big bump in the road, I trip on that. And some of you are probably laughing because some of you know that I fell about 2 weeks ago and tripped, and have a lovely boot on my left foot. But who are you? What do you write about? What story can you share? What's your hero's journey? Overcoming that trip on that bump, standing up, with the help of faith, family, friends, whatever helps you get up. What was the challenge and what was the lesson learned? That's your hero's journey story. What do you write about, and how do you share that content? So we noticed that successful nonfiction books follow a pattern of the acronym SHARE. Yes, another acronym. Yay for all those people that love acronyms. We have a soapbox, and we're going to show samples of this here in a second. You have a soapbox book. That's the type that supports a cause, it creates a movement, offers a new perspective. You have the struggle books. We talked about that a second ago with your life journey. It turns a life mess into a resolution message for others. You have the system, the top 10 ways to build your next house, whatever that might be. And then you have societal. So that's kind of where the anthologies fall into. It's societal. Thank you. Hard word to say today. Or it may also talk about a region or a community, or a type of business that could also be seen as a societal. And we'll show samples of these here. So a soapbox, and these are a couple different versions. On the far left, we have Carol Scott. Some of you may know her. She's not only an author, she's also one of our writing coaches in a couple of our anthologies. Before her writing career, she had another career of being an educator. She has a PhD in child development, and she taught teachers how to spot that child in the room that you are in who needs that little extra hug. And with that little extra hug, maybe you can just make a difference in their lives, helping to bring out the brilliance in different children. That was her soapbox. That was her mission in life. That was how she was not only fulfilling that mission, but feeling fulfilled as a person. by sharing her personal mission. On the far right is kind of a completely opposite story, written by a talent agent. This gentleman is the representative for models that you would see in those circulars that we get, whether it's Target or Kohl's, or did a lot of fashion modeling and was involved with hiring models from other countries and relocating them to New York, Paris, LA, Miami, those types of places that were brand new worlds for them. And what he noticed was a lot of them, especially those that ended up in New York, didn't know how to get an apartment. If they got sick, they didn't know, how do you find a doctor? And so he created a nonprofit that would pair these models when they came to the US with like a mentor. And so that they could show them, this is a bank, this is an apartment building, this is where you would find your doctor, those kinds of things. That became his mission in life, was to help these models survive the United States. Then you have your struggle. So these are two books. The one on the left, some of you may know either one of these authors, but the one on the left is Carrie Pertel. For a while, she was very active in the St. Louis NSA, National Speakers Association. Her book is really her message now. She was hit head on in a local, she was driving her kids home. She was in a minivan. The kids were not injured, but she's had years of, she got hit head on by a drunk driver and has had years of recovery. And this is her story. And that's what she speaks about when she goes out on her speaking circuit, is overcoming challenges like this. And then the woman on the right, she used her job at the time. She actually built her own home from scratch. She was working at a construction company and was a carpenter for this company, and ended up building her own home on there's an island out by Seattle. If I said it, some of you might remember it, but I don't remember the name of it, but that's okay. That's not really part of our story. And the whole concept as she was building this home was that it allowed her to think about how her life was a metaphor for that construction. And part of her story includes, and she talks about it in the book, includes she was date drugged. And she never did really know who it was until later. She was able to get away. She was kidnapped and she was able to get away. And this is part of her story is in that. That was a real life struggle that she turned into a message for overcoming struggle for her audiences. Systems. The one on the left, this is Greg. I was talking about him earlier. His target audience is the agricultural industry. And his was the book that someone pulled off of their shelf and said, let's see if Greg will do a Zoom call for all these people that we invited to this conference that can't be here now. He teaches businesses that are in the agricultural arena how to sell to that industry. And we used the 4 seasons of the year to liken it, spring, summer, fall, and winter, to liken it very similar to a sales cycle of planting a seed, nurturing that seed in the summer, harvesting it in the fall, and then reflecting back on that sale in the winter. That became his system that he was out, very, very simplified, but that was his system. And he shared, probably 7 years worth of blogs that we culled down into about 30 blogs that he used in this book based upon those 4 categories in sales. And then some of you, if you are in the St. Louis area, may know John Ayres, Eyres. He has a cold call company. They will make cold calls for you. And he did a 52 ways. We've had people pick, numbers that you think that they would pick, like 7. That's usually a weekly kind of thing. 52 is a number that a lot of people will pick because it's, 52 weeks out of a year. Every now and then someone will just come along and go, nope, I have 11, or I have 13, or I have 27. The number doesn't matter. You've got a number and you've got a system that somebody wants to follow, and you can show them that it will benefit them to do it in a certain way. Those 27 steps, use your 27 steps. the number itself doesn't matter. It just gives people a rhythm, a cycle, of something to follow. And these are examples of societal books. So you have on the far left, Charlie Brennan. Over the years, people were always telling him little bits of trivia about St. Louis. And literally, this is one of those where someone hands you a big manila envelope, and in it are different pieces of paper with stories. Some of his book came to us with actual typewritten in a Word document. Some of it came to us in little kind of quotes written on backs of napkins, kind of things that he later elaborated on, but it was kind of fun to see his original notes. The book in the middle, that happens to be a former Parkway High School, I think it was Parkway West principal, and she wanted, leave a legacy. She wanted to leave the lessons that she learned for other educators while being in that role for a huge school district. And the one on the far right, some of you, if you, again, another St. Louis author, Bill Ellis, it's this is a collection of stories where he went out and he interviewed women business owners. And it's very close to some of the anthologies that we do, but this particular, we didn't call this one an anthology. He authored it himself. He did the interviews and he authored the stories and wrote the stories himself. But that does lead us into the concept of the anthology, which you see a lot of people trying out there doing. It allows you to collaborate with other professionals. It expands your connections. You get to know everybody that's in the book. And usually most of our books will have anywhere from 30 to 40 authors, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, depending on their topic. And it's a great example of having a societal book because the sponsor of that book will pick the topic, much like Notes from Dad in the upper right. All stories about being a son or being a dad. It was all written by dads or sons or grandfathers, and stories of growing up and the lessons learned. So, how do you create the content and assets? I've mentioned a couple times where we've taken people's blogs. We have even talked with people about if you're writing stories out on social media in your posts, be it LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever your favorite spot is, where your audience is, you want to be sure you're saving those because, I just recently had somebody I know really well lose years of stories that she had told through Facebook and, her connections and pictures and photos that she didn't have anyplace else other than Facebook. If there's anything on Facebook that you want to keep, pull it out and put it into another software like Microsoft Word, something that you'll always have, and save it and even back it up so that you can, if you ever decide to write a book, go back and use part of that as some of your stories that are in your book. So I've seen books start with a simple conversation. And if you've been in any of the Toastmaster or St. Louis National Speakers Association meetings, you'll learn about, some people call it an elevator pitch, some people call it a positioning statement. When somebody says, "What do you do?" Or "Tell me more about what you do." The idea there is two or three sentences that immediately condense down what it is you do, who you help, and how you make that happen. A book can start with that simple conversation. Um, Many of you know Kim Carr. I'm going to talk about you again. I know you're on the call, but I do want to let you know that Kim is a great storyteller. And if you're not following her on Facebook, you may want to look for her. I think she tells fabulous stories about her farm animals. Her photography is amazing, and she mixes the two. In fact, if you got on early enough in the call today, you would have heard us talking about a recent story that I just saw her post, which is just amazing stories of, there's some research in there. There's just her innate knowledge of her farm life and her animals that she takes care of. That she has already written one book, and I hear that she's thinking about another or working on another. Her first book, Dandelion, My House Chicken, it was all about a little chicken that hatched And she brought that chicken up inside her house to make sure that it ate and it was taken care of. And it's a fun little book. But from that social media, as you start to grow your following, then you could develop what I call a freebie, something, a giveaway. What are let's pick a different topic. Well, actually, we could stay with Kim if you don't mind, and I can't see her, so I'm just going to keep talking. She could give away a freebie through her Facebook post that said, the top 10 things I've learned about life from my farm animals. That would give people a great way to get to know her better as she's starting to build her following for the next book. And then who knows, she could build a website, and a website does not have to be complicated. A lot of the authors that we work with are first-time authors, and a one-page website will do just fine. And you can always add pages later. Start simple. Maybe you add a blog and you tell, not only is your story on your blog, but your story also appears a post on the social media that you use, where you'll just use a little bit of it and direct people back to the major blog so that they can read all of it. From that, I've seen authors take that content from their blogs and move it into ebooks. I'm working with a woman now who happens to be working for the federal government in Washington, D.C. On May 1st, she learned her job was eliminated. On June 1st, she learned she was rehired back. And because she is a leadership coach in the government, which there's some jokes there somewhere, the what she noticed was that people aren't necessarily coming to her to figure out how to get another job. It's more about how to handle going from chaos to clarity. We were thrown without a job and now we have our jobs back. How do we know we're not going to lose them tomorrow? Just the uncertainty of being in that position. And so I've been helping her put together a freebie, so to speak, that she's going to started as a one sheet, but now I think we're more like a 10 sheet. So we're closing in on ebook size to where, you know, she can very easily turn this into her first book. And then after that first book is when you start thinking about, okay, maybe I could take that first book, and we recently just did this for an author, expand it into a larger book and add new information, update it. The first book one was maybe 7, 8 years ago. Things have changed since then. She does things differently. She's teaching different things. That creates book two. So there's lots of ways to create content. Think about where you are, what your message, your main core message is. That's what you want to be talking about now, whether you're just doing it in conversations as you're networking or whether you're actually going and using that content on social media. Start someplace. So here's an example of one that we did. So I have a blog on the website. We also have an e-newsletter. So our system is that we take that content, same exact content. Julie posted on our blog. We then extract that from the blog and we're going to post it in the e-news, and that's going to go out to about 2,000 or 3,000 people on our list. And at the same time, we're posting about it in social media. We use LinkedIn and Facebook, and it has that QR code where you can scan that QR code. It's going to take you to the blog that's on the website. So there's a way that you can tie them all together, and they may hopefully see it all three different ways, or at least if it's a new person that has just met you, they're going to see it one of these ways. So how can you make an impact? What are your publishing paths? You have traditional with an agent. You have what I call the author be aware. And we're going to talk more about that. And notice it's be aware, not beware. And then we'll talk about author assisted and DIY. How do you get published in today's world? Again, just one more reminder. And when I do this in person, I have people help me repeat it, kind of like a cheer. If I say, we'd love to publish your book, you're going to say, hold on, wait a minute, let's slow down. And you're going to move out of the way temporarily, perhaps assess the situation, Observe what's going on, observe what this person is doing and saying, do your research, know your options, and if needed, you're going to exit that highway because it just might be blowing too much smoke in your direction. So we're going to start with this main graph where you're going to see on the far left, top right, the least percentage of royalties are always going to be on your left-hand side. The greatest percent of royalties are always going to be on the right-hand side. You're going to be moving at a much slower pace when you go with traditional. In the world of traditional, and I'm talking traditional, before print on demand. In the traditional world, you need an agent. You need someone that's going to represent you and your genre in order to make sure that they're representing you well, and they're going to represent you and try and help you find a publisher. It's not going to go very fast. It's usually anywhere from 18 months to 2 years to find an agent who's willing to work with you. It's also about learning how to submit what information to that agent. What do they want to see? That's a whole nother conversation. There are people that have careers, and I can introduce you to them, and that's all they do is help you create your presentation for the agent. And then they also then help that agent prepare you for the representing you for the publisher. There's a lot more involved than just sending them your manuscript. Oops, here we go. I don't need this. There we go. I had some technology issues. Where are we going? Here we go. Then under traditional, and again, these graphs on the left are not meant for anybody to necessarily read. They're an example of how traditional publishing works. So as we've moved into print on demand and easier ways of publishing, around 2010, it was when Ingram Spark was the first, even before Amazon. Ingram created a side door for independent publishers to come in. Ingram's been around for decades, and they're the major distributor for 90% of all book distribution on the planet. Most of the major traditional publishers that you know work with Ingram to distribute their books around the planet. Those are the Macmillans and the Penguins and the Harper Collins and all those, whoever's still in business anymore. What's happened over the last few years is very much like the banking industry. The big traditional publishers have downsized and let a lot of their people go. Those people go out and start their own small independent publishing companies. And then pretty soon they grow them to the point where another major publisher will come along and pick them up. And so there's different levels of traditional publishing. A lot of the traditional publishers have also followed Ingram in creating an independent arm, very similar to Ingram Spark or the Amazon DIY world, where you step into the print on demand world, you provide them your art, you provide them your written manuscript, all in a nice little PDF package already laid out, and they're going to take care of printing and distributing. The way Ingram and Amazon work together is that you can put your book on Amazon. If you're only on Amazon and someone were to walk into a Barnes & Noble or the corner mom and pop like Novel Neighbor in Webster here in St. Louis and ask for your book, and they're going to ask, who are you distributed through? And you're going to say very proudly, I'm on Amazon. And they're going to look at you and say, sorry, I can't order your book. If they were to order your book from Amazon, they're going to be paying what the public pays. They're not going to make any money on it. So they're not going to want to do that. If you are distributed through Ingram and you have an account set up with Ingram Spark, then that bookstore is probably more than likely already getting their books from Ingram, and they just add your name to that list and they order a couple of books and try out the book that way. So if you're only on Amazon, you may want to rethink that. As we move across out of traditional into the author, what I call the be aware. This is the arena where if someone's going to approach you and say, I'd love to publish your book, you want to find out, do they have any complaints about them? You know, there's certain ones that if somebody mentions their name, I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say, do not sign anything. Walk away, and I'll explain it in detail later, but you just need to walk away. Under the author be aware, you have your words like this get thrown out, and it's very confusing as to who does what. You have your independent publishers. Those I classify and qualify as those that are perhaps formerly working with a traditional publisher, went out on their own, started a smaller publishing company, and have now been picked back up by that traditional, bought out by that traditional. A lot of those independent publishers work that way. Your vanity presses are mostly going to be printing companies who will print your family history or will print your family cookbook, books that maybe you're only going to get, I don't know, 50 to 100 copies of. Hybrid, in my world, I define that as either a vanity or an indie press who they'll make you a deal. Not only will they say, hey, I want to publish your book, which means they're really just going to print it, but it also means that if they're not offering distribution, they're not really a publisher. And that's one big defining question that you can ask. But a hybrid printer or publisher will typically say, instead of paying me up front for the cost of creating your whole book and setting you up so that your book will publish and get printed, I tell you what, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to only charge you X amount of money, but then I'm going to keep your royalties until you pay off the rest of what you owe me. That's a big red flag because I can't tell you how many people have come to us after they've signed one of those contracts and they're trying to get out of it because it's a never ending, you'll never get out of it. They will always take your royalties unless they go out of business and you can get the ownership of your book back. It becomes a wicked web. I would hesitate to recommend anyone that's trying to offer you a percentage of sales or asking to take your royalties and then you pay them off that way. It's a contract that's really hard to get out of. And there are some well-known, high-profile publishing, and I use publishing in air quotes, companies that are doing that. And I'm not going to use any names here, but if at any point you are approached or you find someone where it's too good of a deal to refuse, please call me. I don't charge for this. You're going to want to make sure that I'm more than happy. Well, I'll back up here. One of the things that I'll offer to do is email me the contract that they've sent you. I will read it and I will give you a list of questions. And I do this at no charge because it allows me to learn what the industry is doing. And I will give you a list of questions that you go back and you get answers for. And let's say out of the last 5 that I've done that with, 4 have dropped that publisher and 1 went ahead and went with that publisher. So some of them are good. You just need to know how to read between the lines. We've had one of those 5 very far back on page 7 was a number 157 paragraph that said, and oh, if by the way, we feel that your book would be great turned into a movie, we keep all screen rights. And they were not even going to share that with the author. So you just have to read every single word in those contracts. Not to scare anybody, I'm just trying to make it so that you are aware that there are people out there that are writing that stuff into contracts, and be very careful. That takes us into the DIY world, because in the DIY world, an author was referred to us who had, I'll say this person was an attorney by day, had done research and figured out that yes, you can buy books in China a lot cheaper than you can in the US. And they went ahead and ordered 3,000 books. And not only did they order 3,000 books, it was a holiday Christmas book about a Christmas moose. The supplier in China also convinced them that they needed 3,000 stuffed moose to go, I don't know what's the plural for mooses, to go with their book. And we were called after the delivery of the 3,000 books and the 3,000 moose that this person had Part of it was in their garage, part of it was in their basement. Their entire house was taken up with these boxes of books and boxes of stuffed moose. We eventually worked with them, and if you want to read more about the story, you can actually read our blog that's coming up. The next one is coming up pretty soon. But I talk about this particular incident. Names have been changed to protect the innocent, but people, you don't need to be buying 3,000 books or 3,000 moose unless you know you have a buyer for those 3,000 moose and 3,000 books. There are ways to work around that. Only buy the amount of books in the print on demand world. You only need to buy the books that you know that you're going to sell. Now, in the DIY world, I applaud those people who have figured out Amazon. I applaud you for having figured out Microsoft Word. It is not a friendly software. It does not make me happy when I use it, so I don't. But if you have figured that world out, that's awesome. The metaphor that I like to use when you're working with DIY is that if your daughter comes to you for her high school graduation and her birthday, whatever celebration it is, and shows you this photo of this cake and says, Mom, I really want this cake for my birthday, and you're a chef and a pastry chef and you know how to make this cake, then by all means, please make this cake. But if you're not a pastry chef and you're like me and I'm used to making cakes from boxes and it ends up like the one on the right, your daughter is not going to be happy at all. The great thing about DIY is that, yes, it gives you a lower out-of-pocket investment. You take 100% ownership other than your ISBN. If you're using Amazon and you buy one of their ISBNs, they're going to end up owning that ISBN. And we just went through this with one of our authors where her very first book 7 years ago, she did through Amazon and used one of their ISBNs. Now she has a new book and a new Amazon author page. We couldn't link those two books until we got rid of that first book, unpublished it, republished it using one of her own ISBNs. As a reminder, whoever owns your ISBN is going to get your royalty first. And hopefully you have a contract with them that says you're going to get part of it, if not all of it. So be very careful. You want to always own your own ISBNs because that is the first stop for whoever's going to get your royalties. If you are on Amazon, and here's a little trick of the trade, they're going to have a question on there that they're going to try and sell you expanded distribution. Don't click that box. You will make less money if you click that box. What that means is they're going over and they're going to sign you up on Ingram. You can sign yourself up on Ingram. If you let Amazon sign you up on Ingram, that means Amazon's going to get whatever percentage of sales first from Ingram, which is the supplier for Barnes & Noble, Target online, Walmart online, every mom and pop store on a corner on the planet. And the libraries, because during the pandemic, Ingram bought out Baker and Taylor, which used to be the library distributor, and now Ingram is. So do not, if you're on Amazon, go back and check your account now. If you have clicked expanded distribution, unclick it. You may not make a whole lot more, but you might, make enough for a cup of coffee. Who knows? This is back to that author be aware. There's a few websites that you can check. You can also check out Mark Levine's book called The Fine Print of Self-Publishing. When it comes to indie, vanity, or hybrid, you're always going to make more as an independent author, as a self-published author, versus using the buyer be aware column. These also some websites here that you can check out. These are industry watchdogs. Again, type in the name of the publisher that has approached you to say they want to publish your book. I've had printing companies say that they're publishers now, and I know enough about this industry to know that printing company is not a publisher. They're going to print your book. They just insert the word publishing into that sentence. Instead of saying, yes, I can print your book, they're going to say, yes, I can publish your book. Publishing and printing in the printing world means the same thing. If it does not include distribution, they're not a legitimate publisher. Walk the other way. Then you have the author as publisher. This is where you hire a team to help you do all those things that a traditional publisher does and sets you up as your own publisher. so that you own your ISBNs. Because remember, whoever owns your ISBNs is going to get your money. And with Amazon keeping most of the profits, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to keep whatever you can. So, as an example, when I get reimbursements or royalty deposits from Amazon or Ingram, I always get a notice, an email that'll say, be expecting this deposit. And I'm not out there marketing my book. We've probably got 7 or 10, I've kind of lost track, books out there under our publishing name that we have created. And a monthly royalty check for me could be anywhere from, $11.33 to $2.33. The most I've ever gotten in a month, and I never figured this one out, was a little over $200. Somebody bought a lot of books in order for me to get that. And that's okay. I don't need to know where. They won't tell you. You have a dashboard on Amazon and Ingram, and it'll tell you how many books sold on a certain day. It just never tells you where or who bought it. As you've noticed, we've moved to far right now on greater percent of royalties, and you're going at a faster pace. When you do it yourself or you work with a team to publish your book, you can go at a much faster rate than with a traditional publisher. And this, in all transparency, this is what we do. We help you put together that 10,000 piece puzzle. We've done it a few times. We kind of know what to do first, second, and third. We had an incident this morning. Somebody got something screwed up on their Bowker account, which is your resource for your own ISBN numbers. Do not buy them from anybody else, please. Do not buy them from someone that says, "Oh, I have extras. I'll give you one of mine." No, that means they're going to get your royalties. It doesn't work that way. It's actually a legal offense if they try and sell you one of their ISBNs. And I've heard conversations, people doing that. So be careful who you're talking with. Know what you're up against. Do your research. Make sure that if they're blowing smoke at you, that you walk the other way. We all have stories to tell and wisdom to share. And wisdom not shared is wisdom lost forever. I'm going to leave the screen up shortly, and then I'm going to go make sure we get all our questions answered. If you're here today and you see the screen or even later, the QR code will work then. This gives you access to our top 100+ book marketing tips. That was just recently updated in the last 2 months. So this is basically hot off the press. This is the updated 2005 version. And again, Julie will include that link in our follow-up that has the link to the recording today. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go to questions. Oh, yay, we still have some people here. Yay, awesome. I knew a couple of people had to leave early. So let's see. I knew Jan had to leave. Let me make sure we have any other questions. And Barbara, avoid what kind of distribution? Let's see that. You're welcome to unmute yourself and maybe explain a little bit more about that. I'm trying to remember what I might have said that provoked that question.
Was it extended distribution?
Expanded distribution. Yes.
Expanded.
If you have a book already on Amazon and you have in your dashboard, you have clicked expanded distribution, go out there now and unclick it. Because all they're doing is acting as a reseller to Ingram. And anytime somebody goes into a bookstore and requests that your book, yes, they can now get it because it's available through Ingram. But if Amazon has that expanded distribution box checked, you're not going to make as much money. Amazon's going to get a percentage of that sale. Can you create an ebook with my Dandelion book? Yes. So great question. I did not plant this. There are two kinds of ebooks. If you're familiar with like a novel ebook and you put it in your Kindle or you're looking at it in iBook on your phone or computer, it creates a scroll and you can change the size of the font and make it bigger. You can change the font from Times to Helvetica, and you have more options because your book actually scrolls and doesn't ever really stop. It's like, the old monks that take the scrolls and write them out forever. Just that's how a traditional, mostly word book ebook will function. When you have an illustrated or photographic book, and Kim's pages are very beautiful. Excuse my back while I grab it real quick because I know it's right here. And so for Dandelion, there's a lot of photography in here. So let's say, here's copy on the over here and photo over here. That's not really something that scrolls very easily. So the solution for that type of an ebook is they call it a fixed layout ebook. It basically works much like a PDF, but it functions it still has to be an EPUB in order to function on a Kindle or any other device. Excuse me. And so on a page that has a photo, that's not bad because you can turn your phone this way or, oh, there's my dog, this way or that way, and you'll be able to see the photo. And you can zoom in with your fingers and pinch it and make it bigger. Unfortunately, in a fixed layout type of book, when there's copy, the copy will not scroll. The copy will be just like a JPEG of that page. And so in order to read it, you may have to pinch it out, make it bigger, and then move it around on whatever device it is. Now, if you're on an iPad or your computer and you're looking at a fixed layout, that's not that big of a deal. Now, there are ways that you can combine both. And Kim, yours is probably laid out in a manner where we could easily convert it into a scroll form. It would just make your pictures smaller. If that makes sense. I mean, I'm more than happy to have a longer conversation with you, but that's basically you have regular scrolling EPUB or you have a fixed layout EPUB. And the fixed layout works a lot like a PDF if you were just flipping through pages. Any other
Can I
questions?
ask you another?
Certainly.
Yeah, should I ask? So is that something that you and your team can do for me, or do I have to go through
No,
somebody else?
we do that here. Yeah. Yeah,
All
we
right.
do that here.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. And Andrea, what's the best way to request a local bookstore carrier book if you have self-published? One, you need to have a copyright page that has all the essential elements in it. You need to make sure that it has your ISBN number on it. I would say look at any of the books that we have published and that'll show you what needs to be on it. Look at any of the traditionally published books that will show you what needs to be on it. You need to be affiliated and have an account with Ingram Spark. And I'm Andrea, I'm not sure if you're in the St. Louis area, but I guess shake your head if you're in St. Louis. Are you in the St. Louis area? Okay, cool. So there's certain Barnes and Nobles in St. Louis that love local authors, and it may be all of them. I just know that like the one in Ladue, the one on Clarkson by the old Chesterfield Mall across the street, and the one West County Mall, the mall with the dove. They love local authors. The way that those three Barnes and Nobles work, because we've had authors do book signings there, is you take your book in, you ask to talk to the acquisitions manager or the store manager, and you say, I'm locally published and I'm distributed through Ingram. You get Ingram's name out there before anything else, because then they'll talk to you. If they look at the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at your copyright page, and if it's not set up correctly, they know that you're a DIYer. And they're going to say, how are you being distributed? And if you say Amazon, you're out the door. They're not even going to bother. But if you just say up front, the first thing, now you could also create a one-sheet flyer, and I've had people do that. Put your cover, put your ISBN number on that flyer, put distributed through Ingram, but make sure your ISBN number is on that flyer, and make sure you own your own ISBNs. It's not an Amazon ISBN. And then Because you may get there and it's the manager's day off. And you'll want to leave that and then follow up. Same thing for libraries in St. Louis. And I had a acquisition librarian at the big one on Lindbergh tell me this a couple years ago. Go in and ask for the acquisitions librarian and have your flyer with you, take a book with you. You can always donate a book if you just so choose. Ask them if they're going to look at your copyright page. They're going to do the same thing that Barnes and Noble does. And she also said, ask 10 to 20 of your friends, colleagues, family to call their local library in the Metro St. Louis, whatever one branch they're closest to, and request your book. The library system compiles all that into a request list. So if you've got, and when you get like 12 to 15 people requesting the same book, then what they will typically do is that they will get the ebook and see how many requests they get for that. And then if they're getting a lot of requests for the ebook, then they'll go ahead and get a paper book in each library. But you got to build up the request level for the library system for them to think that people out there are going to really want it. And any other questions? But so like I know we've done a lot with Novel Neighbor and Webster, just because I live I'm in New City and a lot of our authors are in the St. Louis area. So they love Ingram. Now we've done a couple book signings there where there was one that we did and they ran out of books because they had pre-ordered like a couple dozen. And we went out, I had a box in my car and they were selling the box out of the back. We brought the box in, but they sold that box and then they reimbursed us. So the way the Barnes and Nobles will work was, and what they did that day was that they just reordered, they kept track, let's say they sold 12 of my books and then they ordered 12 from Ingram and had them shipped to my house. So that's how they reimbursed me for that day. But then they were able to make a sale that day. And then that's similarly how the Barnes and Nobles work in St. Louis, is that they'll say, yeah, we'd love to have you, because you're also going to say, I'd love to have a book signing here. I'm going to tell all my social media fans and all my family and friends and get them out. And they're going to, sometimes they may ask, well, what social media are you going to use? But they want to know, what are you going to do to bring the new traffic into their store? And that will allow them to think, oh, okay, well, she's willing to put out the effort. Yeah, let's get some new customers in here. Everybody wants new customers. So, but they will say, they'll say, you bring 2 dozen books or 3 dozen books, and they'll keep track of how many sales they make that day. You keep track of how many sales, and hopefully they match, that somebody hasn't just walked with one of your books, but I've always had it match. And then they'll reimburse you by ordering your books through Ingram and have them shipped back to you, whatever they sold that day out of your stash. But then you'll also, whether they sell through Barnes and Noble or through mom and pop, you'll get that credit on Ingram and you'll get the royalty from Ingram for those sales that day. You will make more money on books that you sell yourself, meaning if you're out there speaking, or if you've been asked to, I know there's one group in town, they're calling me all the time. And Kim, if you ever want to do this, let me know, or anybody on here. If you've got a book that's been produced through us, I'm more than happy to promote you when people call me and say, hey, I'm looking for an author to come do a 10-minute presentation or a 5-minute, tell me about their book, tell me where I can find it, and tell me a little story about their book. And there's a couple networking groups in town that call me and say, they may have a topic for that day. And they'll say, Kathy, do you know anybody? And this last one was just before Father's Day. And I happened to have, I was able to get the guy that sponsored that Notes from Dad anthology. He was able to go and speak, and he sold books that day. But so we teach you how to, as you know, if you've set up your own account already on Amazon, that you can go in and you can buy your books at cost. So whenever you buy your books, and let's say they're $3 or $4 somewhere in there, and you've got a box of books with you, you've only paid let's say $4 per book. You turn around, you sell it for 20 as a signed copy, that's pure profit. And remember that if you're signing a copy, that creates more value in your book. So you want to make sure that you're marking it up because you've taken time and effort and ink and a pen to write your name and a little note in that book. And it allows you to make, and that's where you're going to make money. You're going to make, I call it the sprinkles on the cupcake. Your book is the cupcake. Your income is the cupcake, but the amount that you make from Amazon, that's just the sprinkles on top. You're not going to make enough for the whole cupcake just selling through Amazon. You got to get out there and talk about your book and create. People are going to buy your message more than they're going to buy your book. So if you're out there talking about, and that was the whole idea behind what books sell the best that I was sharing earlier. So whether you've got a number system or whether your cause is to promote healthy education in our school systems, or whether your cause is to help, there was a woman that we did a book for, and this was a struggle story, but she was the oldest of 6 children. They survived the Khmer Rouge. Unfortunately, her parents got killed, but she got those 6 children out of Vietnam and they're now living in Chicago. And her telling that story was just this story of overcoming. And maybe that's your message. Whatever your message is, what people are going to buy. How do I overcome diversity, or not diversity, adversity? Excuse me for that. How do I overcome adversity? How do I overcome that bump in the road that don't foresee, but I trip over? That's what people are going to buy. How much would you mark up a signed copy? So for example, if you have a 6x9 book that's about 150 to 200 pages, you're signing it at an event. Let's say you retail it for $16.99. I would sell it at least for $20. I know people who are selling their $18.99 books for $20 because you think if you're at an event, somebody will have 20, usually a 20, a 5, a 10, a 20, and some ones. People don't really carry cash anymore, but they usually have that 20. If you sign it, I would charge 25. And that's the other thing, is if you're thinking about going out on the speaking circuit, have a way for people to pay. Yes, they can write you a checkbook. I don't carry my checkbook anymore. Square is a good place to start. And I know there's some others, but that was how we started, was with Square. But yeah, so if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Julie will follow up, and you'll get a link to the recording if you were not able to be here, and if you are here today. And if you want to schedule time with me, Julie will have that information for a private conversation. More than happy to have that. Julie will have that on there also, as well as the link to the top 100 marketing tips, 100 plus. I can never really get it right at 100 because it's like, oh, but wait, I got to tell them this too. So Andrew, is that your hand up? Feel free to ask a question. Okay. Okay. I appreciate all of you for being here today. Enjoy your weekend as it approaches, and reach out if you have any questions. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.